Welcome to On Our Watch, a podcast about coastal erosion and sustainability in Louisiana. My name is Marian Evans. I'm a filmmaker and a producer of the documentary On Our Watch, a feature-length film that examines Louisiana's coastal land loss crisis and the ways in which it impacts our communities, industries, and culture. The film's director, Jonathan Evans, and I are proud to produce this podcast series that will continue to explore issues facing the Louisiana coast through conversations with local residents, community leaders, and experts. In this episode, we're speaking with John Sabo. John is the director of the Tulane ByWater Institute, as well as a professor in the Department of Coastal and River Science and Engineering at Tulane University. And now, our interview with John Sabo. Well, thank you so much, John, for joining us today. So I know that you had a pretty extensive background in studying river ecology and water resources before coming to Tulane. So what was it that made you want to join the ByWater Institute?
Well, that's a good question. Thanks for having me. I grew up as a kid fishing on rivers and dreaming about being on big rivers. And the Colorado is a big river for the United States, but it's not a big river when you think about some of those that are out there globally. And I would say the Mississippi is the big kahuna in river ecology in the United States. And when I got the invite to come interview here at Tulane, I thought, wow, this is going to be a great opportunity to go study a truly big river, one that's important for the majority of the states of the United States.
Absolutely. And so can you tell us what the primary purpose of the ByWater Institute is and a little bit about how you all work as an organization?
Yeah, so our mission is, our vision is thriving by water. We use the ByWater tagline in there. Our mission is to grow interdisciplinary research on campus on climate change and water, and to connect that research with implementing partners outside of the university who can really make that actionable.
Cool. And so how is the research conducted through the ByWater Institute being used to improve communities' access to safe drinking water and safe living spaces as a whole?
It's a great question. We're actually waiting right now for results back from a grant proposal that we put into the National Science Foundation to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to do research, fundamental research on the data that are needed in order to inform communities about their drinking water systems. And these communities, we're talking about communities that are less than 10,000 residents, so they don't have access to capital like cities do to build big systems. And a key partner in that is a NGO who works sort of hand to hand with some of these communities. We couldn't do that at Tulane because we're here. We might be able to do that with one or two local communities, but not with communities across the United States like our partner does.
Okay. And so what are some of the ways that the Institute is working to support healthy coastal communities here in Louisiana on our coast?
We have a number of projects at Tulane that sort of fit in this space. One of them is about our coastline, where it's going, where it'll be in 20 years, and how, importantly, how communities are going to adapt to change in what coastline is left in the next coming decades.
Do you have any projects that are centered around specific communities in Louisiana or on the Louisiana coast?
A number of our research faculty are working with a broader team at Tulane on the Bird's Foot Delta and the fate of the Bird's Foot Delta. And so some of the communities that are impacted by coastal land loss in those areas are in Plaquemines Parish, for example. Mm-hmm. And our role in that project is really to work with the communities to deliver the science to them so that they can participate in that science, make it better, and understand it on their own terms on sort of that day-to-day basis of what's happening in my backyard.
Right. So it seems like a lot of what y'all do is taking research and then trying to translate that to implement change in specific places. Is that?
We do have strength in that area. I mean, we do basic research as well. So like I have research staff who do things like machine learning applications to freshwater and coastal modeling to make it more efficient, more robust, those sorts of things. But we also like to think about its use case while we develop those scientific methods. And when you start thinking about use case, the first thing you think about is a stakeholder or somebody who's going to be interested in that use case. And getting them involved early is always our mission.
Right. I know that also part of the ByWater Institute's mission is trying to affect change around the world, not just here in Louisiana. So how are you able to do that, or what does that look like for y'all?
That's a great question. I think I'm going to answer it in two different ways. The first is, if we think about, we like to think about our approach kind of like a telescope. So, at the bottom of the telescope, we have New Orleans and the coast, Louisiana. But if we expand that telescope out, we get the Mississippi Basin coming into focus, right? And it's a huge basin. 31 or 32 U.S. states contribute water to the Mississippi Basin. So it gives us kind of this purview into, a national scale from our backyard, which is the mouth of the Mississippi. And that's super important place too, because it's where all the commodities are grown in the United States, and the pipeline for those commodities out is the door to that is right here in New Orleans. And we see the impacts from that in our backyard with the coastal dead zone, things like that. So I think it's really a natural place. And it, to go back to one of your first questions, it's one of the reasons I came here, because it's not just a city on the Mississippi, it's the city to be in on the Mississippi for doing work on the Mississippi.
Yeah.
So that's the first answer. Second answer is, once you start developing a perspective like that, it's relevant in other basins. And I brought, I think, to ByWater some experience in the Amazon and also in the Mekong River in Southeast Asia. And so, thinking about challenges that basins on other continents have in this context of climate change adaptation and big rivers is something that ByWater could be good at, and I hope to strengthen while I'm here.
For our audience, for people who may not know, can you describe to us what is a dead zone? What does that mean?
Well, there's a great episode of this on my podcast. Hopefully we can point people there. But the dead zone is maybe more appropriately called an anoxic zone. It's a place in the ocean where there's low or zero oxygen, and so things like fish and animals can't live there because there's no oxygen to breathe, right? And it forms in the ocean because of inputs from the Mississippi River of nitrate, which is a fertilizer for crops, and that stimulates growth of phytoplankton out in the ocean, which are marine plants. Those phytoplankton eventually die. They sink to the bottom of the ocean, where they start to decompose by microbes, and that eats up the oxygen down there. And that disappearance of oxygen grows and eventually creates a big zone of anoxia, which is bad for anything that needs oxygen to live, right?
Yeah. That was a very good explanation. Thank you.
But
and yes, I would love to hear more about your podcast. So tell us about the podcast that you have going on.
Podcast is called Audacious Water, and it focuses on climate change adaptation and topics about water resources. Typically, I interview folks that are either in the science realm or in the implementation realm, and try to straddle that boundary between doing science and applying it.
Very interesting. I'd also wanted to ask, are there any important lessons that you've learned over the course of your career, and has your perspective changed at all about river ecology and what you're studying?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I started, I was working in a fisheries department, which by definition is applied. And I really wanted to do basic research while I was there. So I ended up going to Berkeley, doing very basic research, and getting a little bit unsatisfied and tired with doing basic research for the sake of doing basic research. I love it personally, but I didn't see it having impact for society, which is something that I wanted to achieve in my career. And so gradually I started moving away from pure basic research towards use-inspired research that has implications for some of the enormous challenges that we face today. And at Tulane, I had the opportunity to really run with that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You're kind of bridging those two approaches together.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me about reading about the ByWater Institute was the emphasis, like you said, on interdisciplinary collaboration and innovative thinking. And it seems like you kind of bring together a lot of different departments within Tulane as well. So I was wondering if you could kind of speak to that philosophy and why do you think it's important to work in that way?
Well, from the beginning, I'm a professor and a teacher since I was a child almost. And you learn a lot by working with people from different intellectual backgrounds and disciplines. They have different ways of approaching problems, asking questions, analyzing data, if they use data. You know, there might be qualitative and quantitative approaches to the same problem that give different insights. And so I think having a multidisciplinary approach to something as complex as climate change is essential because you need to attack that problem from different perspectives.
Right.
So yeah.
As such an experienced river ecologist, are there any particular issues that you're most interested in or focused on at the moment?
That's a great question. There's a bunch, and I don't want to give a 5-minute answer. So I'm going to say, let's start with systems approach to the Mississippi. I've done a lot of work in my past on arid land rivers like the Colorado River Basin, and really taking a step back and looking at them as a whole. Mm-hmm. There's not enough of that on the Mississippi, and I think that's kind of the first place, at least personally, that I would like to contribute research to understanding the Mississippi in the context of transformations that we're going to see in climate change over the rest of my life, over the next couple of decades, right?
Right. Are there any upcoming projects or research directions that you're particularly excited about or looking forward to? Or, you know, like where would you like to take the ByWater Institute going forward?
Well, an example would be something like the coastal dead zone. We have colleagues at LSU, at Louisiana State, who are world famous for working on these issues, mm-hmm. who've been on my podcast before. I have friends and colleagues in Iowa who work on farms and reducing, nitrate and in water bodies in Iowa, which eventually make their way down here to Louisiana into our dead zone. Connecting that big picture would be something that I would love to make a mark on at Tulane and with ByWater is we were the institute that pulled those pieces together to accelerate the change that's already happening from some of these players that I've talked about already.
Right, like finding the common themes in all the coastal environments around the world to like find a better solution.
Yeah, and in some ways it's like it's doing the science that's necessary in that systems context, but also finding the right partners to implement solutions and to some of the challenges that we face.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really cool approach that you guys have. And thank you so much for your time today and talking to me.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you for listening to On Our Watch. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with John Sabo. Don't forget to subscribe to On Our Watch on your favorite podcast app to be notified about future episodes. You can also watch a video version of this podcast on YouTube, which you can find a link to in the description. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode next week. This podcast is made possible through grant funds from the Greater New Orleans Foundation and executive produced by Bruno UK Steiner.